The storm clouds gathered over the East China Sea on that fateful April morning. 200 miles north of Okinawa, death approached from the horizon in formations that would rewrite naval history forever. Inside Yamato's radar room, trembling hands gripped a pen. The officer stared at his private journal. Words formed slowly on the page. Words that could earn him severe punishment if discovered by senior command. This defied everything the admirals had promised. No battleship could survive what filled his radar screen. Hundreds of aircraft signatures bloomed like deadly flowers across the scope. They came from multiple directions at speeds his massive ship could never hope to match. The heaviest battleship ever launched was about to face an enemy it had no way to fight. Nearly 72,000 tons of steel and armor bristled with the most powerful naval guns ever mounted on any warship. Yet in these open waters, a terrible new reality was writing the final chapter of an entire era. Over 3,300 men stood ready that morning across Yamato's decks and within her compartments. None understood they sailed on history's last great battleship sortie. A desperate gamble that would end not in glorious surface combat, but in aerial massacre. The mathematics were brutally simple. Japanese admirals refused to accept the equation. One battleship against nearly 400 aircraft, operating in coordinated waves with complete air superiority. The outcome was predetermined. Confidence would transform to catastrophe in less than 2 hours. But the collapse had begun years earlier in Kure Naval Arsenal's design rooms. Between 1934 and 1937, Japanese naval architects pursued an obsession that would define their doom. They could not match American numerical superiority in warships. Their solution was individual vessels so powerful that one Japanese battleship could defeat 2 or even 3 American ones. Captain Kikuo Fujimoto pitched his revolutionary vision to the Naval General Staff in March 1934. His proposal was staggering. A battleship displacing 70,000 tons at full load, armed with 9 18.1-inch guns, protected by armor up to 16 inches thick on the belt. These specifications shattered international naval treaties. They exceeded anything any nation had attempted. Construction began in November 1937 at Kure Naval Arsenal under extreme secrecy that bordered on paranoia. Workers signed non-disclosure agreements under penalty of imprisonment. Neighborhoods near the shipyard had their windows boarded over completely. Palm trees and tall barriers rose around the construction site like a fortress wall. When Yamato's sister ship Musashi launched from Nagasaki in November 1940, the entire city was placed under air raid alert. All residents were forced indoors. No civilian eyes could witness the vessel that emerged from the slips. The deception worked perfectly. American naval intelligence never learned Yamato's true specifications until after the war ended completely. Yamato was commissioned on December 16, 1941, just 9 days after Pearl Harbor transformed the Pacific into a battleground. She measured 263 meters in length, with a beam of 38.9 meters. Her displacement of nearly 72,000 tons fully loaded made her the heaviest battleship ever constructed by any nation. Her main armament of 9 Type 94 naval guns firing 18.1-inch shells represented the absolute pinnacle of naval artillery. Each gun barrel stretched 21.13 meters and weighed 147.3 metric tons. The guns could hurl a 1,460-kilogram armor-piercing shell to a range of 42 kilometers. A single salvo from Yamato's 9 main guns launched more than 13,000 kilograms of steel toward the enemy. The destructive power was beyond imagination. Her armor protection defied belief. The main belt was 16.1 inches thick, angled at 20 degrees to maximize effectiveness against incoming shells. Main deck armor ranged from 7.9 inches over machinery spaces to 9 inches over the magazines where ammunition was stored. The faceplates of the main gun turrets were 25.6 inches thick, the heaviest armor ever fitted to any warship in history. Below the waterline, Yamato incorporated an elaborate torpedo defense system consisting of multiple longitudinal bulkheads, creating compartments that could be flooded or kept empty to absorb torpedo explosions. This system was designed to withstand 3 torpedo hits on the same side without catastrophic effect. This claim would face its ultimate test on April 7th. The secondary armament initially consisted of 12 155mm guns in 4 triple turrets and 12 127mm dual-purpose guns in 6 twin mounts. For anti-aircraft defense, Yamato initially carried only 24 25mm guns. This pathetically inadequate number reflected the Imperial Japanese Navy's fatal underestimation of air power, an oversight that would prove catastrophic in the war's final years. Yamato's propulsion system consisted of 12 compound boilers driving 4 steam turbines generating 150,000 shaft horsepower. This immense power plant pushed the massive hull to a maximum speed of 27.4 knots during sea trials, remarkably fast for such a heavy vessel. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto chose Yamato as his flagship on February 12, 1942. The commander of the combined fleet and planner of the Pearl Harbor attack understood naval aviation better than almost any officer in the Imperial Japanese Navy. He had opposed construction of the Yamato class. He argued that resources would be better spent on aircraft carriers. Yet even Yamamoto could not resist the prestige of commanding from the most powerful battleship afloat. Yamato's first combat deployment came during the Battle of Midway in May 1942. Yamamoto embarked aboard the battleship with the main battle force, positioning his fleet 300 miles behind the carrier's striking force. The battle plan called for carriers to attack Midway Island and lure the American carrier fleet into range of Yamamoto's battleships. The plan collapsed spectacularly when American carrier aircraft found and destroyed 4 Japanese fleet carriers in a single day. Yamato never fired a shot in anger. She turned back toward Japan without engaging any American forces whatsoever. This pattern would repeat throughout Yamato's career with devastating consistency. Despite mounting guns that could destroy any ship afloat from ranges where enemies could not reply, Yamato spent most of the war hiding in anchorages. Her fuel too precious to waste. Her value too great to risk in combat, where American air power dominated absolutely. Between July 1942 and June 1944, Yamato spent endless months at Truk Lagoon in the Caroline Islands. She served primarily as a flagship and accommodation ship. Crew members gave lectures, conducted drills, and waited for a battle that never came. By late 1943, American forces began their island-hopping campaign across the Central Pacific. Japan's strategic situation had deteriorated catastrophically. The Imperial Japanese Navy had lost dozens of destroyers, cruisers, and carriers in the Solomon Islands campaign and the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Fuel shortages became critical as American submarines strangled Japanese oil shipments from the Dutch East Indies. The stranglehold tightened with each passing month. Yamato returned to Japan in December 1943 for extensive modifications. Workers removed 2 of the 4 triple 150mm secondary turrets. They replaced them with additional anti-aircraft weapons desperately needed for survival. Light anti-aircraft armament increased from 24 to 52 25mm guns. Radar systems were installed throughout the ship. When Yamato emerged from Kure Naval Arsenal in March 1944, she was a more balanced warship, but the strategic window for battleship dominance had closed forever. The first and only time Yamato's main guns fired at enemy warships came in October 1944 during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita led a surface-striking force, including Yamato and her sister ship Musashi, through the San Bernardino Strait to attack American landing forces at Leyte. On October 24th, during the Battle of the Sibuyan Sea, American carrier aircraft subjected Musashi to wave after wave of devastating attacks. Over 4 hours, the battleship absorbed an estimated 17 bomb hits and 19 torpedo hits before capsizing and sinking with the loss of over 1,000 crew members. Yamato witnessed her sister ship's destruction from 30 miles away. The lesson was clear and terrible beyond words. No amount of armor could protect a battleship from massed air attack. At 6:57 on the morning of October 25, 1944, Yamato opened fire on American ships for the first and only time in her career. The range was 35,000 yards. 6 American escort carriers with minimal escorts lay directly ahead. These were the ships of Taffy III, providing air support for ground forces on Leyte. For nearly 2 hours, Yamato pursued the American ships, firing salvo after salvo from her massive main batteries. She scored hits on the escort carrier USS White Plains. A shell exploded just beneath the hull, causing severe damage. She contributed to the sinking of escort carrier USS Gambier Bay and destroyers USS Johnston and USS Hoel. Yet even in this moment of apparent triumph, battleship warfare's limitations became apparent. American destroyers charged directly at Japanese battleships in what should have been suicidal attacks. Their desperate courage worked against all odds. Kurita, fearing submarine attacks and believing he was engaging fleet carriers rather than escort carriers, ordered a general retreat. His battleships were on the verge of reaching American landing beaches when he turned away. As Yamato withdrew from battle, American carrier aircraft from the main fleet caught up with the Japanese force. Bombs damaged Yamato's weather deck and killed several crew members. The writing was on the wall in letters of fire. By late 1944, Japan's strategic position had become absolutely hopeless. American forces controlled the Central Pacific, were liberating the Philippines, and were preparing to assault islands within bombing range of the Japanese home islands. The Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet had been effectively destroyed as a fighting force. Yamato returned to Japan in November 1944 and entered dry dock at Kure for repairs and modifications. On November 25th, while transiting the East China Sea, Yamato's battle group was attacked by American submarine USS Sea Leon. The submarine sank battleship Congo and a destroyer. Yamato escaped undamaged, but the message was clear. American submarines now hunted Japanese warships with impunity in waters once considered safe. The repairs and anti-aircraft upgrades at Kure consumed the final months of 1944. Workers installed additional 25mm anti-aircraft guns, bringing the total to 162. They added more radar systems and improved damage control equipment throughout the ship. When Yamato left dry dock on January 3, 1945, she was as ready as any battleship could be for the air-dominated warfare of the modern Pacific. But readiness was irrelevant in a war that had moved beyond battleships completely. There was no longer fuel for operations, no air cover for missions, and no strategic purpose for battleships in a conflict that had evolved past them. Captain Kosaku Aruga took command of Yamato on November 25, 1944. He was a veteran officer with extensive experience in cruiser and battleship operations. A professional sailor who understood what lay ahead. March 1945 brought American forces to Okinawa. The island lay only 350 miles south of the Japanese home island of Kyushu. Its capture would provide American forces with airfields and anchorages for the invasion of Japan itself. On March 19th, American carrier aircraft from Task Force 58 struck Kure Naval Base in a massive raid. Over 300 aircraft attacked Japanese warships at anchor in their supposedly safe harbor. Yamato was hit by one bomb on her bridge structure and suffered damage from near misses. 5 crew members were killed and several dozen wounded. The attack demonstrated that nowhere was safe from American air power. American forces invaded Okinawa on April 1, 1945. The landings were virtually unopposed, as Japanese forces withdrew to prepare defensive positions in the island's rugged interior. The stage was set for a final confrontation. During a conference in Tokyo in March 1945, Emperor Hirohito was briefed on plans for Okinawa's defense. The army explained extensive preparations for ground defense and massive kamikaze air attacks against American forces. The emperor reportedly asked a question that would seal Yamato's fate. But what about the Navy? What are they doing to assist in defending Okinawa? Have we no more ships? The Navy's senior leadership, already humiliated by years of defeat and their inability to prevent American forces from approaching the home islands, felt compelled to demonstrate that the Navy still existed, still had fighting spirit remaining. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, ordered his staff to develop an operation using the Navy's few remaining surface ships. The resulting plan was called Ten-Go, Heaven No. 1. Yamato, light cruiser Yahagi, and 8 destroyers would sortie from the inland sea. They would transit through the East China Sea and attack American forces at Okinawa. The ships would fight their way through American naval defenses, beach themselves on Okinawa's shores, and use their guns as immobile coastal artillery until destroyed. Any surviving crew would go ashore to fight alongside the army garrison until killed. It was a suicide mission disguised as naval strategy. The plan was presented to Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito, commander of the Second Fleet, on April 5th. Ito's reaction was reportedly furious. He called the operation a meaningless sacrifice of ships and men that would accomplish nothing except propaganda value. He pointed out the obvious flaws with devastating clarity. The force would have no air cover beyond the first few hours. American submarines and reconnaissance aircraft would detect the sortie immediately. American carrier task forces would intercept long before Japanese ships reached Okinawa. The force lacked sufficient fuel even to return to Japan. It was a one-way trip to destruction. Ito refused to order the operation initially. The argument continued through the night of April 5th. Staff officers from Tokyo explained that the order came from the highest levels of command. Imperial authority could not be questioned. Ito eventually relented, though he reportedly said the operation was a waste that would achieve nothing except adding names to casualty lists. Honor demanded obedience, even unto death. At 1600 hours on April 6th, Yamato departed the Tokoyama oil depot for the last time. The battleship had been given fuel for a one-way trip to Okinawa. No provision for return had been made. Yahagi and 8 destroyers accompanied Yamato into the gathering darkness. The total force comprised approximately 3,000 Japanese sailors sailing toward certain death. Before departure, crews were assembled and informed of the mission's true nature. Any man could request to remain behind without shame or dishonor. None did. Approximately 67 junior officer candidates and some sick or injured crew members were ordered off the ships to preserve trained personnel for future operations. The rest sailed into history. The force passed through the Bungo Strait between Kyushu and Shikoku shortly after midnight on April 7th. American submarines, USS Threadfin and USS Hackleback, were waiting in predetermined positions. The submarines had been positioned based on intelligence intercepts that had revealed Operation Tengo's details days before execution. American codebreakers had penetrated Japanese naval communications completely. The submarines tracked the Japanese force throughout the night, transmitting regular position reports to Task Force 58. The Japanese detected the submarines and knew they were being followed like prey, but they could do nothing to prevent it. As dawn broke on April 7th, the Japanese force passed Cape Sata and entered the open waters of the East China Sea. They formed a defensive circle with Yahagi in the lead, Yamato in the center, and 8 destroyers arrayed in a protective ring. Distance between ships was maintained at 1,500 meters. Speed increased to 20 knots as they raced toward their destiny. At 0600 hours, 6 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters arrived to provide combat air patrol. This token force represented the entirety of Japanese air cover available. The pilots had been told to remain until 1,000 hours, then return to base regardless of circumstances. After that, Yamato would face American air power completely alone. The morning was overcast with low clouds at 3,000 feet and intermittent rain squalls. Visibility varied from excellent to nearly zero as weather fronts moved across the sea. American reconnaissance aircraft first detected the Japanese force at 0823 hours. An F-6F Hellcat from carrier USS Essex spotted Yamato's unmistakable silhouette through a break in the clouds. The pilot transmitted a contact report that reached Task Force 58 within minutes. Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher commanded Task Force 58 from his flagship, carrier USS Bunker Hill. Task Force 58 consisted of 16 aircraft carriers, 8 fast battleships, 15 cruisers, and over 60 destroyers. Total air complement exceeded 1,000 aircraft. Mitcher had been expecting Yamato's sortie. American intelligence had intercepted and decoded Japanese communications regarding Operation Tengo days in advance. Upon receiving confirmation that Yamato was at sea, Mitcher immediately began preparing a massive airstrike. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of Fifth Fleet, initially ordered his battleship force under Rear Admiral Morton Deo to intercept Yamato. 6 modern battleships, including USS Missouri and USS Wisconsin, began positioning to meet the Japanese force in traditional surface action. Mitcher preempted the battleship engagement by launching his aircraft without waiting for Spruance's approval. He understood that carrier aircraft could destroy Yamato more efficiently and with far less risk than any surface engagement. Spruance accepted Mitcher's decision when presented with the fait accompli. The age of battleship versus battleship combat was ending before their eyes. Task Groups 58.1 and 58.3 began launching aircraft at 1,000 hours. Carriers USS Hornet, USS Bennington, USS Below Wood, USS San Jacinto, USS Essex, USS Bunker Hill, USS Hancock, and USS Bataan launched a total of 280 aircraft in the first wave. The strike force consisted of 132 F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair fighters, 50 SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers, and 98 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. 53 aircraft from USS Hancock launched 15 minutes late and failed to find the Japanese force in poor weather, reducing the first wave to 227 aircraft actually engaged. Task Group 58.4 launched a second wave of 110 aircraft 45 minutes after the first wave departed. This included aircraft from USS Yorktown, USS Intrepid, and USS Langley. In total, approximately 386 American aircraft were committed to the attack. Only about 280 actually engaged the Japanese force due to navigation difficulties in the poor weather conditions. Each Avenger carried a Mark 13 torpedo with a 600-pound Torpex warhead designed specifically for ship killing. Each Helldiver carried either 1,000-pound armor-piercing bombs or 1,000-pound general-purpose bombs, plus 2 250-pound bombs. The fighters carried bombs or rockets in addition to their machine guns and 20 mm cannon. It was an aerial armada, unprecedented in its destructive power. At 10:14 hours, Yamato's air search radar detected the first American reconnaissance aircraft circling just beyond visual range. The 6 Japanese Zero fighters attempted to intercept, but were hopelessly outnumbered against superior aircraft. They managed to shoot down no American aircraft before withdrawing at 1,000 hours, as ordered by their fuel limitations. After 1,000 hours, Yamato and her escorts faced the American strike force completely alone. At 1,100 hours, American aircraft began circling the Japanese force just outside anti-aircraft range. Pilots from different carriers coordinated their attacks, organizing into strike groups targeted on specific ships. The coordination was methodical and professional, demonstrating the vast experience American naval aviators had accumulated over 3 years of intensive Pacific combat. They had become the world's most effective naval air force. At 12:32 hours, lookouts aboard Yamato sighted the first incoming strike formation. Captain Hara aboard Yahagi later described the sight as absolutely terrifying. Large formations of aircraft circled the task force in clockwise and counterclockwise rotations, like wolves circling wounded prey. The Japanese sailors understood they were about to die. At 12:34 hours, Yamato opened fire with her forward main battery turrets. The battleship was firing special Sanshikidan shells, anti-aircraft munitions that used time fuses to create shotgun blasts of steel fragments. Firing 18-inch naval guns at aircraft was an act of complete desperation. The shells proved utterly ineffective, as American aircraft simply flew through the explosions untouched. At 12:37 hours, the first wave attacked with devastating coordination. Dive bombers descended through the clouds, pulling up at the last moment to release their bombs with practiced precision. Torpedo bombers approached at wave-top height from multiple directions simultaneously. Fighter bombers strafed the decks with machine guns and 20 mm cannon, systematically killing exposed anti-aircraft crews. The noise was absolutely overwhelming. Yamato's 162 anti-aircraft guns fired continuously, creating a constant roar. The thunder of main battery guns firing anti-aircraft shells mixed with the sharp crack of bombs exploding. Added to this cacophony was the scream of diving aircraft and the desperate shouts of damage control parties throughout the ship. At 12:41 hours, 2 bombs struck Yamato's upper deck near the forward superstructure. The explosions destroyed 2 triple 25mm anti-aircraft mounts and killed their entire crews instantly. The bombs blew ragged holes in the deck plating, but did not penetrate to vital spaces below. Yamato's armor was holding against bomb attack. At 12:45 hours, a torpedo struck Yamato far forward on the port side below the waterline. The underwater explosion sent massive shockwaves through the entire hull structure. Flooding began immediately in forward compartments. Watertight doors held, and the initial damage was contained by trained damage control teams. 2 more bombs struck near the aft centerline turret at 12:46 hours. One bomb landed directly on top of the turret, penetrating the heavily armored roof and exploding inside the working chamber. The explosion killed almost the entire turret crew instantly. Only 1 man survived the carnage within that steel tomb. Between 12:48 and 12:50 hours, 2 or 3 torpedoes struck Yamato in rapid succession. Confirmed hits struck near the port side engine room and boiler room areas. Flooding increased dramatically as seawater rushed through massive holes torn in the hull below the armor belt. Counter-flooding was initiated on the starboard side to correct the developing list to port. The first wave attack lasted approximately 18 minutes of concentrated hell. As American aircraft withdrew to regroup, damage assessment teams reported to Captain Aruga on the bridge. Yamato had been hit by at least 5 torpedoes and 4 bombs. Flooding was significant, but still under control through heroic damage control efforts. The ship maintained 20 knots speed. Anti-aircraft armament was reduced, but remained functional. This assessment changed dramatically at 13:02 hours when radar operators detected the second wave approaching through the overcast sky. This wave consisted of 50 fresh aircraft from USS Essex and USS Bataan. At 13:22 hours, an Essex F-4U Corsair hit Yamato with a 1,000-pound bomb on the port bow area. Helldivers followed immediately, scoring additional hits in the bridge superstructure area. 5 Helldivers were damaged by anti-aircraft fire, demonstrating that Yamato's defensive armament remained dangerous to attacking aircraft despite previous damage. Between 13:25 and 13:30 hours, 3 or 4 torpedoes struck Yamato on the port side amidships in quick succession. All torpedo bombers had been specifically ordered to attack only the port side to accelerate the battleship's capsizing. This concentration of damage on one side proved devastatingly effective. Flooding accelerated dramatically in the port side boiler rooms and engine spaces. The list to port increased past 10 degrees and continued growing. Counter-flooding on the starboard side corrected the list temporarily, but Damage Control Central reported that the starboard outer engine room would have to be flooded to prevent immediate capsizing. Captain Aruga faced an agonizing decision. Flooding the starboard engine room would save the ship temporarily by correcting the dangerous list, but it would also doom 300 men working in that space. There was no time to evacuate them from their posts. The valves had to be opened immediately, or the ship would capsize within minutes. Aruga made the decision that would haunt survivors forever. The valves were opened and seawater rushed in, drowning 300 sailors at their duty stations. They died to save their shipmates and their ship. At 13:33 hours, the third wave arrived with 110 aircraft from USS Yorktown, USS Intrepid, and USS Langley. Yamato was already severely damaged, listing noticeably, and slowing through the water. She had become a much easier target for the experienced American pilots. Aviators described her as turning in great slow circles, trailing black oil, burning in multiple locations, but still firing every anti-aircraft gun that would bear on incoming attackers. Between 13:33 and 14:02 hours, Yamato was struck by at least 4 more torpedoes and several additional bombs. Fires burned throughout the superstructure and upper works. Flooding was completely out of control, despite desperate counter-flooding efforts. The list to port increased steadily and could no longer be corrected. The ship slowed from 20 knots to 10 knots, then to 5 knots as her propulsion spaces flooded. Steering control was lost as rudder machinery failed. At 14:02 hours, Captain Aruga received the final report from his executive officer. All damage control officers were dead. Counter-flooding could no longer correct the increasing list. The ship was doomed beyond any possibility of salvation. Aruga ordered all remaining crew members to abandon ship immediately. Those who could reach the upper decks had a chance of survival in the warm waters. Vice Admiral Ito sent a final signal by flag hoist, canceling Operation Tengo and ordering the remaining ships to withdraw to Japan immediately. Yamato's radios had been destroyed, making signal flags the only means of communication with the escorts. Ito retired to his cabin in the superstructure. He would not be among the survivors rescued from the water. Captain Aruga tied himself to the binnacle on the bridge. He also chose to go down with his ship rather than face the dishonor of survival. At 14:07 hours, another torpedo struck Yamato's starboard side. At 14:17 hours, the 8th and 9th torpedoes hit the port side in the final coordinated attack. The uncorrected list passed 15 degrees and continued increasing rapidly. Alarms warned of critical temperatures in the forward main battery magazines as fires spread below decks. The pumps designed to flood the magazines with seawater were not working. Ammunition began cooking off in secondary explosions throughout the ship. At 14:20 hours, Yamato capsized completely to port. Over 2,000 men were still aboard, many trapped below decks in flooded compartments with no escape possible. As the battleship rolled past 90 degrees, seawater rushed into the funnel uptakes and flooded the boiler rooms. The sudden influx of cold seawater onto superheated boilers created a massive steam explosion. Simultaneously, the uncontrolled fires in the forward magazines reached the main powder charges stored for the 18-inch guns. At 14:23 hours, Yamato exploded in a detonation that could be seen and heard over 100 miles away. The explosion of hundreds of tons of propellant and ammunition created a fireball that rose 20,000 feet into the air. A mushroom cloud formed above the wreckage site. The blast wave was so powerful that several American aircraft flying overhead were damaged by the concussion. Yamato broke into two main sections and sank rapidly in 340 meters of water, approximately 200 miles northwest of Okinawa. Of 3,332 crew members who had sailed that morning, only 276 survived the destruction. The American aircraft had attacked for exactly 1 hour and 46 minutes. Yamato had been hit by an estimated 11 to 13 torpedoes and 6 to 15 bombs during the sustained assault. American losses were 10 aircraft and 12 aircrew members. The disparity in casualties was absolutely staggering and demonstrated the complete transformation of naval warfare. Light cruiser Yahagi and 4 destroyers were also sunk during the running battle. The remaining 4 destroyers rescued what survivors they could find in the oil-covered waters and withdrew toward Japan. The Battle of the East China Sea demonstrated the absolute supremacy of carrier aviation over surface warships. No amount of armor or firepower could protect ships operating without air cover. The destruction of Yamato sent shockwaves through Japan that reached the highest levels of government. For the first time, authorities admitted that Japan's greatest battleship had been sunk. The announcement described Yamato's mission in heroic terms, claiming the ship had fought valiantly against overwhelming odds to defend Okinawa from American invasion forces. The reality was far bleaker than the propaganda suggested. Yamato had accomplished absolutely nothing except adding 3,000 names to ever-growing casualty lists. She sank no American ships. She prevented no landings on Okinawa. She did not even reach visual range of her intended target. For the United States Navy, Yamato's destruction confirmed the complete transformation of naval warfare that had been developing throughout the Pacific War. Aircraft carriers were now unquestionably the capital ships of all naval forces. The lessons learned from sinking Yamato influenced American naval planning for decades afterward. Concentrated air attack could destroy any surface target regardless of armor protection. Coordination between multiple carrier groups multiplied effectiveness exponentially. Focusing torpedo attacks on one side of a ship accelerated capsize and reduced the time available for damage control. Survivors of Yamato carried memories of the battle for the rest of their lives. The trauma of watching their magnificent ship destroyed remained vivid decades later. Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida, the radar officer who had written in his journal before the battle, survived the sinking through luck and determination. He spent hours in oil-covered water before being rescued by a destroyer. After the war, he wrote Requiem for Battleship Yamato, a detailed account of the ship's final voyage that became essential reading for naval historians. His book became a bestseller in Japan and remains the most detailed first-hand account of the battle available. Yoshida described the psychological impact of serving aboard a ship everyone knew was doomed. The crew understood they were sailing to certain death in a hopeless mission. Yet discipline never broke down completely. Men went to their assigned posts, performed their duties professionally, and died without panic or cowardice. American commanders studied the battle extensively in post-action analysis. The after-action reports from Task Force 58 analyzed every aspect of the engagement for future reference. Torpedoes proved far more effective than bombs against heavily armored warships. Yamato's thick armor had deflected most bomb hits, but torpedoes struck below the armor belt where the hull was more vulnerable to flooding. Concentrated attacks on one side of the ship caused uncontrollable flooding and rapid capsizing. This tactic would become standard doctrine for attacking large warships. Coordination between dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and fighters maximized overall effectiveness. Dive bombers and fighters suppressed anti-aircraft fire, allowing torpedo bombers to make their attacks with fewer losses. The sheer number of aircraft involved overwhelmed Japanese defenses completely. Yamato's 162 anti-aircraft guns shot down only 10 American aircraft despite firing thousands of shells during the battle. The strategic implications of Yamato's destruction extended far beyond immediate tactical lessons. Japan's decision to expend her greatest battleship in a suicide mission reflected the complete desperation of Japan's strategic position in April 1945. No rational military calculation suggested that Operation Tengo would succeed in its stated objectives. The mission was ordered for psychological and political reasons rather than sound military strategy. American planners understood this mentality and feared its implications for future operations. If Japan was willing to expend 3,000 sailors in a hopeless battleship sortie, how many lives would be lost in an invasion of the Japanese home islands? The Battle of Okinawa, still raging when Yamato was sunk, demonstrated Japanese willingness to fight literally to annihilation. Over 100,000 Japanese soldiers and civilians died defending that single island. After the war ended, Yamato became a powerful symbol in Japanese culture, representing both technical excellence and tragic futility. The battleship embodied the contradictions of Japan's war effort. The 1974 anime series Space Battleship Yamato reimagined the sunken battleship being raised from the ocean floor and converted into a spacecraft to save Earth from alien invasion. The series became hugely popular throughout Japan, establishing a template for space opera anime that continues today. Yamato had found new life in popular culture. The 2005 film Yamato told the story of the battleship's final voyage from multiple crew members' perspectives with unprecedented realism. The film earned over 5 billion yen at the Japanese box office. The Yamato Museum opened in Kuro in 2005, exactly 60 years after the battleship's sinking. The museum features a massive 1:10 scale model of Yamato, along with artifacts, photographs, and detailed exhibits about the ship's construction and service. The museum attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors annually from Japan and around the world. Yamato continues to fascinate people decades after her destruction. Several underwater expeditions have located and photographed Yamato's wreck on the sea floor. The battleship rests in two main sections approximately 340 meters below the surface. Japanese law protects the wreck site as a war grave, prohibiting salvage operations or disturbance of the remains. The 3,000 men who died aboard Yamato remain with their ship in the depths. Historical assessment of Yamato's value remains contentious among naval historians and military analysts. Some argue that she represented a magnificent achievement of naval architecture and the culmination of battleship development. Others contend that Yamato represented a colossal waste of resources, a technological dinosaur completed just as the age of dinosaurs was ending forever. Both perspectives contain elements of truth that cannot be dismissed. Yamato was superbly engineered and constructed using the most advanced techniques available. She incorporated revolutionary design features and represented the absolute peak of battleship construction technology. But she was also strategically obsolete before her keel was even laid. The resources consumed by building Yamato and her sister ship Musashi were absolutely staggering for a nation with limited industrial capacity. The steel used in both ships could have built approximately 45 destroyers or 6 large aircraft carriers. Japan desperately needed both destroyers and carriers throughout the war. The chronic shortage of escort vessels allowed American submarines to devastate Japanese merchant shipping. The fuel oil consumed by Yamato during her brief operational career could have powered dozens of smaller warships on actual combat missions against American forces. The 3,000 crew members who died on April 7, 1945, represented invaluable trained naval personnel that Japan could not afford to lose. From a purely strategic perspective, Yamato consumed enormous resources while achieving minimal results. She was a magnificent failure of strategic planning. Yet there remains something undeniably impressive about Yamato's very existence. She represented the absolute limit of what was physically possible in battleship construction using 1940s technology. Her guns remain the largest ever mounted on any warship in history. Her armor remains the thickest ever fitted to any vessel. Her displacement remains the record for battleships. This record will never be broken because no nation will ever build battleships again. The type became extinct with Yamato's destruction. In this sense, Yamato achieved a form of immortality not through combat effectiveness, but through being the definitive final statement of an entire class of warship. The American pilots who sank Yamato understood they were making naval history. They had destroyed the heaviest battleship ever constructed by any nation. Yet for most of them, it was simply another mission in a long and brutal war. Several pilots wrote letters home mentioning the battle, describing the impressive size of the battleship and the intensity of anti-aircraft fire they encountered. But there was little celebration or sense of historic achievement. By April 1945, American naval aviators were seasoned professionals conducting their assigned job with methodical efficiency. Sinking Yamato was satisfying, but not particularly surprising given their overwhelming advantages. They possessed superior training, extensive combat experience, better aircraft, and crushing numerical superiority. This contrast between American professionalism and Japanese sacrifice characterized the Pacific War's final year with stark clarity. American forces approached combat with overwhelming material superiority and systematic tactical planning. Japanese forces, lacking adequate resources and viable strategy, resorted increasingly to suicidal attacks intended to inflict maximum psychological impact while achieving minimal tactical results. Yamato's suicide mission fit this desperate pattern perfectly. The mission was never expected to succeed from a military standpoint, but Japanese leaders felt compelled to demonstrate fighting spirit. Spirit without strategy proved to be merely waste. Yamato's 3,000 dead did not slow the American advance toward Japan by even a single day. Okinawa fell to American forces as planned. American aircraft began bombing the Japanese home islands with complete impunity. 4 months after Yamato sank beneath the waves, Japan surrendered unconditionally. The final irony of Yamato's story lies in the fact that she was sunk while attempting to accomplish exactly what American forces wanted most. The mission to Okinawa drew Yamato into open water where American carrier aircraft could destroy her completely. If Yamato had remained safely in port, she would have posed a significant threat during any American invasion of Japan. Destroying her while anchored would have been far more difficult and costly. But Japan's leadership chose to expend their greatest battleship in a meaningless gesture rather than conserve her for actual defense of the homeland. American commanders could hardly believe their good fortune when intelligence confirmed that Operation Tengo was actually proceeding as planned. Task Force 58 obliged by destroying Yamato completely and definitively. The threat was eliminated at minimal cost to American forces. Today, Yamato rests peacefully on the seafloor of the East China Sea. She serves as both a tomb for 3,000 brave men and a monument to the end of the battleship era. She never fought the decisive surface engagement that Japanese naval planners had envisioned when they designed her. She never justified the enormous resources invested in her construction and operation. Yet she endures in historical memory because she represented the absolute limit of human engineering achievement within the constraints of battleship design principles. Japanese admirals boasted that Yamato was unsinkable, the greatest battleship ever built, invincible in surface combat against any enemy. They were absolutely correct about her being the most powerful battleship ever constructed. But unsinkable? Nearly 400 American aircraft and less than 2 hours of sustained combat proved that particular claim to be catastrophically wrong. Yamato sank because the fundamental nature of naval warfare had changed forever. No battleship, however powerful or well-protected, could survive in an environment where the enemy commanded the air completely. The age of the battleship died with Yamato on April 7, 1945. What replaced it was unquestionably the age of the aircraft carrier. And in that crucial competition for naval supremacy, Japan had already lost decisively.